teenager in 50s Britain, everything was different. They had rationing, they had national service, they didn't have much money. But they did have the baddest, maddest, most dangerous pop singers there have ever been.
Rock and roll is the greatest influence since Jesus Christ.
They were sexy, they were trouble, and your mother certainly didn't like it.
The birth of rock and roll just came snaking out of his hips.
Fantastic. It just touches nerves all over the place.
Everybody got real wild.
Every parent's worst nightmare at the time.
They were new, noisy, and nasty.
Our parents hated it, which even made it better.
It came from nowhere. And when you think, that's a brilliant thing.
Even punk didn't have the same sort of impact.
They changed the world. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, the kings of rock and roll.
People knocking, but they can't come in. People knocking, but they can't come in. People knocking, but they can't come in. Come back tomorrow night and try it again. You said you love me and you can't come in. You said you love me and you can't come in. Woo! You said you love me and you can't come in. Come back tomorrow night and try it again. Woo!
Rock and roll is a river of music, which has absorbed many streams. Rhythm and blues, jazz, ragtime, cowboy songs, country songs, folk songs, all have contributed greatly to the big beat.
Get out in that kitchen and rattle those pots and pans. Get out in that kitchen and rattle those pots and pans. Well, roll my breakfast.
I was working in a paper mill. I left school when I was 15, and I was an apprentice glove cutter, you know, and they used to play music all day in a factory. And all of a sudden, this rock around the clock, you know.
1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock. 5, 6, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, rock. 9, 10,
Jesus, what is
12
that?
o'clock, rock. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight.
That record, Rock Around the Clock, went right round the world, and it turned the world on its head.
That rock and roll jive stuff was so infectious.
The whip the girls in the end of his showing all their knickers. All the guys thought it was great, but I guess to mums and dads, you know, the can-can was probably about the nearest bit of danger they'd ever seen.
That is the point at where the jail burst open.
I've come to the conclusion that rock and roll is a symptom of the young people, asserting themselves for their right to do things as they think fit.
The weird thing was that the man who kicked all this off was a boss-eyed former country musician who looked more like your dad than your dad did. But looks aren't everything. There's timing, too.
The liner Queen Elizabeth glided in sedately enough. It was Southampton that was rock and rolling for the arrival of Bill Haley and his Comets. Here on a tour of Britain, Bill left for London, and soon that boat train was rocking over the rails in Hep time.
When he came here personally, I mean, it was the biggest thing that ever happened.
So you're used to this sort of thing, aren't you?
Well, we quite often have people come to meet us like that, but I think this was the most enthusiastic reception I've ever seen.
Bill Haley was the first one that British people had ever seen, you know, doing rock and roll music. He was the first one that came over here, you know, to Britain to do it. So he didn't, I mean, I thought that Kiss Girl was a little strange.
Unfortunately, Bill Haley looked like the family grocer, but the music was fantastic. It was really great.
Bill had made country records with a bit of a polka on the side. He discovered rhythm and blues, but it was the combination of the two, white music and black music, that did the trick.
Do you get a lift yourself when you hear rock and roll music?
Well, yes, I would say that, John, that it makes me feel sort of happy, and I enjoy playing it very much. It's an exhilarating type music, I would say.
We had no idea that Bill Haley's Comets was going to be a worldwide famous band. We were just there to make a living. Every show was sold out, and they would line up around the block, 4 abreast. It was just awesome times.
It was ridiculous. I've spoken to some of those guys in the band over the years. They say that when they got here, it was the whole train, when they went by train, all the stations and people along the lines, and it was a big thing.
When it came to getting tickets for the Bill Haley thing, I was desperate. We took the morning off school. It was just magical to go there. We had bad tickets. We were right there, halfway back on the upper circle of the Regal Edmonton. And we heard, on your marks, boom, boom, get set, boom, now ready, ready, go, everybody razzle. And the curtain opened on a whole new life.
Hot dog, buddy, well, bless my soul, I'm rocking on down the line. Hot dog, buddy, hot dog all the time. I got a shape like a lizard, legs like a frog. When I hear...
To me, it was worth it. I know that the teachers at the time were strongly saying that you will regret this, and you may regret it the rest of your life. If you've missed out on something at school, you'll never catch up with it again. But when I went to that concert, they could have caned me every day for a month. I would have done it. I'd have done it again.
When Bill and the Comets toured in 1957, the kids went wild, despite that rock and greengrocer image. But maybe it wasn't all that surprising.
Kids in England had nothing, really. No fashion. There was no music. It was all blokes singing in white suits, singing through megaphones and that sort of stuff, you know.
I'm the happy chappy who makes you want to smile. I make music just for you. And I go skid a little boop boop boop.
Hi love, 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 hi lee, hello, hi left. Hi lee, hello, hi love, 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 hi lee, hello, hi left.
They couldn't go anywhere to go. They couldn't go to the pubs. And when they were 18, of course, the boys, straight in the army. They still had conscription. It was pretty sad, too.
Rock and roll became delinquents' music. Delinquents basically were equated to teenagers. So, therefore, rock and roll equals teenagers.
It was almost a lull before the storm, because when rock and roll did hit, people like myself were so blown away.
Rock and roll was flashy and trashy, colourful and exciting, and American.
America was a richer country. It didn't have the problems in the war years that this country had. So, in a sense, they picked themselves up a lot faster after the war and able to find new exciting things in cars and music. And it looked a lot more colourful to us from over here.
Teenagers set about copying America as much as possible, through the clothes they wore, the way they cut their hair, their music, and, well, all sorts of things, actually.
What do you call that exercise you get?
It's rock and roll, brother, and we're rocking tonight.
But it could have been a nightmare. Rock Around the Clock was only 15 minutes away from never existing, dumped in favour of a novelty song called 13 Women and Only One Man in Town, brought in by Bill Haley's producer, Milt Gabler.
Milt Gabler had his own song, 13 Women and Only One Man in Town, which was as flat as a fart, if you don't mind me saying so. Nice song, but flat as a fart.
And then after we got that in the can and finished, he said, okay, now do that rock thing that you're going to do. That was his attitude about Rock Around the Clock.
A happening record was all well and good, but the real fire was lit by a 9-year-old American boy blasting it out in his bedroom. His dad, actor Glenn Ford, was having a meeting about his new film downstairs. Most parents would get him to turn that bloody noise down, but instead, young Peter Ford gave his dad an idea.
That's the song. That's the song I want in the movie. And he made arrangements to get it and put it in the film, and then it became a worldwide hit.
Because we could hear it on big speakers for a change, instead of those silly little radio speakers, it really hit you. The rhythm was fantastic.
Riots, dogs, for Rock Around the Clock.
Given that we think that it's quite tame now and quite a nice song, and we think of Happy Days and the Fonz and people like that, rather than going around smashing up things, was when it first came out in a movie, people tore up seats in the auditoriums.
Not everybody reacted the same way, though.
I mean, I thought, why? Surely the film's not that bad,
It wasn't just in the 2 and 9s either. Bill Haley's concerts were just as lively.
Some of the things that happened, like the riots in Germany, The kids, when we played, they wanted to dance.
Wanted to dance, yeah.
And they were standing in the aisles, and all of a sudden we started playing, and this all started happening, and they started dancing, and then the police came in and tried to quiet them down, and they did not want to be quieted down. They wanted to do what they felt.
Rock and roll was exciting. It was a way to let off steam. It was a boon to cinema seat manufacturers. But it was a bit more than that, too.
It moved from the stage of, children should be seen and not heard, to the kids going, we will be seen and we bloody well will be heard.
So if Bill Haley, the singing greengrocer, remember, could produce this sort of reaction, what would happen if you added something else into the mix? Something like, oh, I don't know, sex.
Elvis was the king.
Walking through a party in the county jail. The prison band was there, they began to wail. The band was jumping and the joint began.
Elvis had the voice, just the most beautiful voice you'll ever hear.
He was an instant star.
One word, sex. A damn sexy artist that projected it across all white, black, everyone.
The birth of rock and roll just came snaking out of his hips.
Everything has happened to me so fast in the last year and a half till I'm all mixed up, I mean, I can't keep up with everything that's happening.
The girls loved Elvis. Well, the boys too, I suppose, really, but they wouldn't admit it,
The first night that I laid eyes on Elvis Presley was just an experience I'll never, ever forget. I really think it was love at first sight. And he asked me to go out after the show. My friend Glenda that I was with, she said, "You lucky dog, you are so lucky."
Just had that charisma.
He loved being Elvis Presley. He said to me one time, he said, are you okay? Can you go into restaurants and that? I said, yeah, if you go unannounced, you know what I mean? And he said, well, I can't do it. I said, no, you won't with that white suit on. I said, you look like Elvis Presley. I said, you got to try and dress down if you want to go into a restaurant. Yeah, right. He was like, But he didn't want to.
And why should he? In 1955, Elvis Presley was 20 years old and having the time of his life.
We worked in Dallas, outside the venue, and there was about 35, maybe 40,000 people there. And these kids were screaming and hollering. You couldn't hear nothing nobody said. And I leaned over to Scotty. I said, I think this boy's gonna make it.
Well, that's all right, Mama. That's all right for you.
Bill Haley might have pushed rock and roll kicking and screaming into the world, but Elvis made the world rock. He seemed to have it all. Good looks, a quiff that defied gravity, and a truly revolutionary sound. His music pulled together the country and gospel he grew up with and the black rhythm and blues he heard from his neighbours in rural Mississippi.
He was poor white trash. These were the days of segregation. They lived right next to and part of the black neighborhood, so all his influences came that way.
Elvis's quest for rock brought him to Sun Records in Memphis and label boss Sam Phillips.
Sam Phillips was, he was always saying, get me something different. I want to hear something different.
Elvis said that he'd come to Sun to make a record for his mother's birthday, but when Phillips heard what he'd done, he knew he was onto something and pulled Elvis back into the studio.
They were all packing up to go when they got jamming. And he went, that's all right, Mama. That's all right for you. He went, oh, wait, hang on, guys, just do that again. So, it's that moment that becomes fateful.
Because he was always very proud of the fact that he had a big range and he could sing anything.
He just loved to perform. I think that really was his life.
They didn't know what to think about him. They thought he was black. And then he went on television and they said, hey, that's a white guy.
Well, Elvis, just one moment.
Hello, Elvis.
Hello?
Well, it's the one for the money.
Elvis had the sound, He had the image. He also had a pair of trousers with a life of their own.
He was in Mississippi doing a show, and the girls standing right in front of him saw his pant legs shaking, and they started screaming.
So it wasn't the leg moving as much as the pants was moving.
And Elvis turned to Scotty Moore, the guitar player, and said, what are they screaming about? And Scotty Moore says, I don't know, but keep it up.
The local girls went crazy. One leapt on the stage and the cops had to stop her from jumping on his blue suede shoes. They just love him to death.
I think that when you shake and you quake when you sing, is that sort of an involuntary response to the hysteria of your audience? Involuntary? Yeah. Well, I'm aware of everything I do at all times, but it's just the way I feel.
He'd do all his leg movements and go,
He shocked a lot of people. He was the first person to be shocking and outrageous.
Well, since my baby left me, well, I found a new place to dwell. Well, it's down at the...
The old world found Elvis getting jiggy with it, scary beyond belief.
He was getting, he got a lot of bad press in America because they said he was like a burlesque artist. He was like a bump and grind, and you know, it was like one of these strip dancers in a strip joint.
Whatever it might have looked like, under the image, Elvis was a traditional Southern boy who spoke softly and loved his mum.
His mother would tell him, said, son, don't worry about it. You're not doing anything wrong. If his mother said it was right, it was right. He didn't care what they said.
Well, they're so lonely, they could die. Now the bellhop's...
It took me time to realize how authentic he was and how truly great he was. The minute he got in front of a microphone, he came alive.
There's a melancholy in his voice, which makes it bittersweet, and I think that's what makes it a really interesting voice.
I can remember when we used to go and buy our big 12-inch vinyl, they used to wrap them in shop paper, and I used to always get outside, tear the paper off, and dump the paper in the bin. I want everyone to say, oh, look, he's got Elvis's new album. I wanted to be recognized as being an Elvis fan.
You could die.
Even listening to Hound Dog now, the opening words, without music, is like a flame is kind of soaring into the sky.
You ain't nothing but a hound dog.
Now Elvis was underway, there was no stopping him, with classic single following classic single. Some were new songs and some were R&B covers, like Hound Dog, originally a hit for Kate's aunt, Big Mama Thornton.
We got a big hit. I said, you're kidding. He said, no, Hound Dog. I said, Big Mama Thornton? He said, no, some white kid named Elvis Presley. I said, Elvis who? It was too fast, it was kind of nervous, and you know, it didn't have the feel that Big Mama's record had.
You ain't nothing but a hound dog. Been snooping around my door.
So we were disappointed, but after it sold about 7 million or 8 million records, we began to see the merit of it.
Well, they said you was high class. Well,
if he can do it, I can do it too.
If Helen of Troy launched 1,000 ships, then Elvis launched a lot more hips. Yea, even into the home counties.
And suddenly, we were all, as boys in school, getting the Brill cream, curving the hair up and slicking it back at the sides and trying to look like Elvis. We used everything from Brill cream. The worst thing I've tried was lard. I mean, it looked good, but it smelt unbelievable.
Never had your collar down like that. Your collar always came up, so you became someone else.
So, screaming girls, screaming boys come to that. Thousands hanging on your every move. It was a complete change in the way audiences behaved, and nobody's lives would ever be the same.
Kids would not hurt you intentionally, but they didn't know how much power they had in masses. They could knock another child down, or they knock us down, and then they stomp on you, just run over you. They didn't mean to do it, but it happens.
I'd get scratches when we'd go through mobs, people grabbing at you, they'd tear off his clothes. It was just unreal. That's why we went out in the middle of the night, to avoid crowds. Everybody else was sleeping. We were out trying to, you know, make do and have fun and party. He was a victim of his fame.
Walking through a party in the county jail. The prison band was there, they began to wail. The band was jumping.
There must have been an easier way, and there was. Hooray for Hollywood.
Rock and roll and movies made perfect partnership in the 50s. Movies were bigger then. The threat from television wasn't as great. There was no such thing as video or whatever. And it was probably the only way you could get to see your artists.
But working in films wasn't without its trials and tribulations.
His first trip to Hollywood to do Love Me Tender, they made some crowns for his teeth, but they were just temporary, couldn't eat with them. So he would give me his teeth to hold while we were having dinner or whatever, and I didn't have a pocket, and what am I going to do with the teeth? And I stuck them up in here and let them hang out, and I looked like a vampire.
It's just a beast in me.
And then they put mascara on his eyes and things like that. And of course, that just brought out these deep-set eyes anyhow. And he liked the look, and he kept it. He felt pale when he went out in public if he didn't have on his movie makeup. It was the wildest thing. He had on makeup, I didn't.
Please take another chance and let me have another dance with you.
You couldn't go any higher than, you couldn't get any bigger than Elvis got. He represents somebody that flew fast, high, and absolutely aflame.
My music changed my life. It stopped us being poor. But that's an inevitable thing. But I didn't do it to stop being poor. I did it because I wanted to look and sound and sing like Elvis. Simple, pure and simple.
You know, you always remember your first love. My first love happened to be Elvis Presley, and how can you forget him, even today?
Oh, baby, it's just you I'm thinking of.
John Lennon said if you were to change the name of rock and roll, you may as well make it Chuck Berry.
But Chuck Berry took the guitar and gave it life, gave it purpose.
Chuck Berry, it was like all those guys was on one off.
The standard framework of rock and roll music, the guitar breaks, the grooves, that wouldn't exist without Chuck Berry.
Genius is reflected in his lyrics, in his music, in the way he dresses, in the dance that he invented, all of those things. This is his originality, this is his art.
When I was in first, second grade, and, you know, the classic goes on, well, my dad's a fireman and cool, and, well, my dad's a policeman. I said, well, my dad's the king of rock and roll.
Not half he wasn't. But the poet laureate of teenage America was already 30 with a jail term behind him by the time rock and roll came a-knocking. He ended up in Chicago, where blues legend Muddy Waters took him under his wing. The door Chuck ended up banging on belonged to Chess Records.
Next day, he went to my father, and when he said Muddy Waters sent me, my father brought him in. And he played 2 songs. When they heard the second song, Ida Red, they immediately looked at each other, my father and uncle, because we were very aware that different, unusual, unique sounds were very popular to the black community. We weren't even thinking white.
Maybe they weren't, but what Chuck had was a plan, and a cunning one at that. The road to success was modern and fashionable, but Chuck's songs were full of farm animals and girls called Ida Red. A makeover was called for, and with an eye to the main chance, Ida Red became Maybelline, renamed for a brand of mascara.
In those days, the radios had buttons you pushed for each station, and he was compulsively pushing the buttons, listening for our records. All of a sudden, he pushed the button, and then came Maybelline by Chuck Berry. And he looked at me and he said, wow, we're on WIND, we've got it. Because they never played black music. And in fact, when Chuck Berry broke, many of the disc jockeys and radio stations in America didn't realize he wasn't white. And when they found out he was black, a lot of them pulled the record.
We only had like one station that blacks could be heard on from a certain time.
Blacks could not even drink water from the same water fountain that the whites did, where we couldn't walk into the front door of a restaurant to get food. They would put a rope in the city auditorium, put whites on one side and blacks on another, and they never met.
Chuck resented that he was a black man in America prevented from doing things.
Chuck wrote about things he couldn't ever be part of. He was the ultimate outsider, looking in and taking notes. The frustration he felt was transformed into songs about teenage angst, and that opened up a whole new world.
You know, gang, you all remember Maybelline, about the young man with the guitar who couldn't catch her with his car? Well, here he is to tell us all about it with a brand new automobile, Chuck Berry, and you can't catch me.
Chuck's brilliance was understanding, you know, I can play to this black audience, but what I'm aiming for is kind of white teenage America.
I bought a brand new airmobile that's custom made for the flight division with a powerful motor and some hideaway wings.
Chuck Berry was into the psyche of white teenagers. He wasn't writing for black ones. I don't know how he knew it. Maybe he had a couple teenage white girlfriends on the side. It wouldn't surprise me. At that time, it would have had to have been big secret.
He knew what he was doing. He knew that if he kept playing to everybody as opposed to any one particular group, that rock and roll as we knew it then and as it is today would be where it was.
When they started playing rock and roll and the white folks started listening to rock and roll, that was instant integration, because then there were whites coming down into the black community just to hear the music.
Chuck Berry influenced everybody, certainly all the great guitarists around today.
You know, as Keith said, he only has 4 or 6 chords. I said, yeah, right. And Keith would say, yeah, but the combination of those chords is the foundation of rock and roll.
Everyone's ripped off that riff, you know, many times over and over, and it's just the crazy thing about that one particular riff in Johnny B. Good is that it's gone on for over 50 years now.
I hear the Chuck Berry double riff. But, you stole that from Johnny B. Good. I know that's almost grown. You can't fool me.
When the starts of those songs, when he's going, you know, that played on the guitar, sounds really exciting. The other thing about Chuck, I think, is that his words have a certain meter to them that you just can't, they kind of almost, the words make you want to dance.
I go to write a little letter, gonna mail it to my local DJ. And it's a jump into the record that I want my jockey to play. See, different language.
Just hearing the words on their own, it gets you going.
His lyrics are so natural. You know, when he talks about no particular place to go, it's about a guy and a girl going for a ride. They want to go for a walk because the moon's out, and he can't get the safety belt off. The seatbelt gets stuck, so they have to drive on. So on his way, he's all aggravated, and he still can't get the safety belt to loose. And it's just a fun song about what could have happened to anybody, and probably did happen to thousands of young American kids.
Actually, Cliff, I think it's about sex.
Nobody had ever written about 20th century life, about cars and about jet planes whizzing over freeways night and day.
With no particular place to go.
Sweet little 16, she just got to have about $500,000.
Sharp words, sharp tunes, sharp suits.
You'd never seen anything like it. The suits, the way he performed, you know, like the old duck walk thing he did, and that guitar playing, which was really rough and raw and slightly out of tune too.
You know, first time that I can remember seeing him on stage, I was awestruck. It's like, wow, my dad is on national television. Wow, he's playing that guitar that I just saw him buy.
Knew how to get the audience up and keep them there, you know. And once he got them up and he did the duck walk, he didn't have to work anymore.
real example of Chuck Berry is when they sent the Voyager spacecraft to outer space. They put a disc on it with Beethoven and Bach and Shakespeare, and representing rock and roll was, you know, Chuck Berry, Johnny B. Good.
Will there be something that is cool as rock and roll? Well, personally, with what my father does, I don't think so, but I'm biased, all right?
Rock and roll has got to go.
I think if I hung out with Jerry Lee Lewis, I'd avoid talking to him about his 13-year-old wife.
He's been a naughty boy over the years, apparently.
You know what I am. Woo!
It's otherworldly. I mean, and I don't know what other world it is. It could be the dark side we're looking at.
I'm pretty sure it's the dark side.
Oh, it's cooler up here.
He had 1 foot in heaven and 1 foot in hell.
Shake, baby!
And he don't care if he makes a bad note or anything. It doesn't bother him a bit. He thinks everything he does is great. And because of that, it is.
I call myself a rock and roll singer, rock and roll country singer, rock and roll country and western rhythm and blues singer, a stylist.
Jerry's got the bull by the horn. Yeah, and I ain't faking. I got a whole lot of shaking going on.
And what a stylist he was. The man they call the Killer came from Louisiana, born into a family of true believers.
It was never said at my house if Jerry could ever make a hit with his music. It was always when Jerry makes a hit with his music.
The news is out all over town.
It didn't take long for Jerry's precocious talent to surface.
Jerry was about 8 years old at that time, and he just walked over to the piano and started playing it. Now, a lot of people don't believe that, but that's how talented Jerry Lee Lewis is.
It wasn't an easy life for the young Jerry Lee.
They moved time and time again, and we're just very poor. And when you're very poor and you live in the South, religion is one of the things that will give you solace.
He was playing in church, but he was starting to sort of boogie things up.
They had this song and they wanted him to sing it like this. There are some things I may not know. And my brother was doing it like this. There are some things I may not know. And that's what got him into trouble at Bible school. I liked his version of it better. We gathered dozens and dozens of eggs, and my daddy sold those eggs to get the money to buy the gasoline to take my brother up to Nashville. Of course, he was turned down in Nashville, and then he came back through Memphis, and Jack Clement made a tape for Sam Phillips.
I played the tape for Sam, and he loved it. And before it ever got to the singing, he reached over and stopped it. He said, "No, I can sell that."
But what they didn't realize, or what Sam didn't realize, was Jerry was not controllable. Jerry did what he wanted to do.
And what Jerry wanted to do was make a big hit.
We did a whole lot of shaking. One take, no dry run, nothing. That was it.
Once a whole lot of shaking came out, then it was explosive. He went from making, this $200 a night to thousands. So he was like, look at this, look at me, I've arrived.
We were like living in this shack one day, and we had nothing, and then all of a sudden, Jerry bought us this brand new Fleetwood Cadillac. We went to Doris's dress shop in Faraday, Louisiana. I think we bought all the clothes they had in our sizes. I mean, we had boxes and boxes of clothes. It was fantastic.
And as Jerry got bigger, more and more of the world went looking for that pumping piano.
We were going through Pontypridd, and all of a sudden, a whole lot of shaking going on came on. And my friend said, "Is that what you're talking about?" I said, "That's exactly what I'm talking about."
And if you thought the songs were wild, then wait until you saw the stage shows.
One song, he just stood up and kicked the piano stool away, which became his trademark.
His hair was long, so he's flicking his hair around.
He was kind of jealous of all the guitarists, you know. He was on the same bill as Chuck Berry, and he was on before Chuck Berry, and so to outdo him, he set fire to his piano at the end of his set. So it was almost impossible for Chuck Berry to follow him.
You shake my nerves and you rattle my brain. Too much love drives a man insane. You broke my will, but what a thrill. Goodness gracious, great balls of fire.
Great Balls of Fire was Jerry's next huge hit, and its religious imagery wasn't lost on the Bible school dropout. Always a man caught between heaven and hell.
I remember Sam was saying that rock and roll is the greatest influence since Jesus Christ, and Jerry Lee's saying rock and roll is of the devil.
You can help people. You can save souls. No. No, no, no.
Yes, you'll never make it.
How can the devil save souls? Devil ain't gonna save it. What are you talking about? Man, I got the devil in me.
Sam Phillips said, "Well, if you think it's the devil's music, then don't do it." And he said, "No, I'm not saying it's the devil's music." He said, "That's what I was taught to believe."
I'm Christian-minded, but I'm not living it. Now I regret that I don't. I regret that I haven't, because I know I should have.
You better listen to me, sugar roller cat, the rest of high school rockin'.
Preachers preached against it. It was the devil. It was the devil's music.
Everybody hopping, everybody bumping, never high school hop.
God, there's people today that'll stand up and cry out against it. Thank God there's people today that'll feel the Spirit of God. That'll stand up and say it's wrong, it's sin.
I've been grooving, never high school hop. Well, everybody's humming, everybody's bumping.
What kind of style of music you would need that people go, we're going to ban it, we're going to burn the record, and we're going to arrest people who play it. That sounds ludicrous now.
They were told to tone it down. You know, that this stuff is like too, you know, it's too wicked, it's too wild.
But you, teenager, you're engulfed in it. You're sunk, you're pulled down, you're trampled on, you're bound and forsaken by the devil.
Adding fuel to the fires of sin was the fact that in 1957, Jerry, not quite divorced from his first wife, married his 13-year-old cousin.
He said, "Girl, I loved you the first time I laid eyes on you." And I said, "What?" Now, being a 13-year-old girl, idolizing this man, what are you going to do?
Of course, she is our cousin, but I believe it's our second cousin. I think that would be considered unusual anywhere, except in our family.
Things came to a head in May 1958 when the newlyweds travelled to Britain for a sellout tour.
When I answered the question to the reporter when he said, "Who are you, miss?" and I said, "Oh, I'm Jerry's wife." When I saw the reaction on his face, I knew I had said the wrong thing. And he said, "And how old are you?" And I knew, oh my God, he was too anxious to know the answer to this. So I just lied to him and said I was 15. Like that would make a big world of difference.
I thought, well, I'm not going to miss this. I don't care who's married to, it doesn't bother me. So we went, and of course the audience gave him a terrible time too. They were all really jeering him and booing him. He just played on.
No, I don't regret it, and the criticism didn't mean nothing to me because I knew I had enough talent to overcome it. I've always done what I wanted to do, as long as I felt it was right.
To him, because he felt that having sex outside marriage was a sin. So because he fell in love with his second cousin, he married her before he had sex with her.
5 days and 3 shows later, Jerry Lee and Myra are back on the plane, Jerry's career heading for a tailspin of its own.
Well, the papers reported that you were greeted with silence over there and with catcalls from the audience. Is that right?
Well, I can't agree with them there, sir. Our audience was very nice and very good.
Were you there, Mrs. Lewis?
I was there, but I wasn't at the shows.
Oh, you weren't at the shows. Oh, did you notice anything like that sort of reception?
No, it was a very good reception, I thought.
When were you married?
Pardon?
When were you married?
Well, we leave our personal questions out of this, sir.
All right. Well, good luck. Thank you.
They didn't want any part of us. They pulled Jerry's record off the air. They canceled TV shows.
From $10,000 a night to $250 a night is a pretty big disappointment.
Well, we were, of course, disappointed. There goes our meal ticket.
Those things that happened to us will always be us. It didn't just happen to one of us, it happened to the two of us together. And it joined us together in history, and that's where we'll always be.
Little Richard, and I just freaked. I'd never heard anything like it. And that was it for me. It was like goodbye, Lonnie Donegan, hello, rock and roll.
And suddenly this sound came out of the radio of a man singing. I'd never heard the like of it before. It was just so fantastic.
When he stepped out, you say, well, my God, who is that? You know, he left an impression on you at all times.
He sort of ate a lyric, he grabbed it and spat it out. It was sexual, it was hot, it was rebellious, it was everything.
This is that kind of breed of rock and roll pianists that use their pianos like guitars.
His music was a perfect mix with the way he looked, with his hair, with the way he dressed, with the way he played the piano, his whole act. He was a very clever, creative artist. You know?
I created rock and roll, didn't even know what I was doing.
Little Richard really shocked people. Not only was he black, not only was he screaming Lucille up in your white kid's bedroom, he was practically a drag queen. And it really confused parents. It never confused kids. He was a showman. They loved him. They didn't care.
The moment Richard stepped on that stage, it was like someone turned on a light switch and you could just feel the love and the energy just sparking from one person to the other. It was like a love fest.
To the straight-laced sections of the 1950s, Little Richard Penniman was a brother from another planet. He was loud, he was lewd, and he was black, wildly attractive to the new rock and roll audience, but the devil incarnate to a lot of other people.
Well, of course, Richard used to sing in church with a group called the Tiny Tots Quartet, which was his own family's group. The Bible was pulverized into these youngsters at that age. In fact, Richard, often at the end of a concert, he'll say, I am the only thing left, and I am the king. My music is the healing music. It makes the blind see, the lame walk, the dead rise up, your liver quiver, your bladder splatter, and your big toe shoot up in your boot. That's Little Richard.
The wild abandonment of gospel music made Richard's records sound like speaking in tongues, but what really made them fly was when he let loose his, ambiguous sexuality.
Richard was looking out of a 4th floor hotel window and saw me and sent for me. The first thing that came out of my mouth was, does he know I'm a girl?
Send me.
I remember standing in the door and he was lying on a bed. And there were stars, there were bells, I got dizzy.
Sex to me was like a smorgasbord. You should just go and pick whatever you want. If you wanted it, get it all. That's what I did.
He just liked to watch all the time, and he would hang around with black strippers, and they would get the rhythm and blues stars, and he'd look at their penis, all this kind of stuff.
Now, I must admit he kept Vaseline stock up.
And when he crossed the excitement of his music with a flamboyant image, equal parts drag queen, stripper, and monster from outer space, well, Richard even startled his own friends.
Earl Palmer is the most marvellous drummer. He sounds like 1,000 drummers. But he said when Little Richard came in the studio all dressed up with makeup and a pompadour in 1955, they were terrified.
We looked up and saw him. My whole first sentence was, "What the is that?" We didn't say, "Who is that?" We knew who it was. But we told Richard about it. He had a big laugh. He said, "Never seen anything like me, did you?"
Earl met Richard in 1955 when the Georgia Peach fetched up in New Orleans to work at one of rock and roll's shrines, J&M Studios, now a laundrette, by the way. His first songs were slow, bluesy, and not very special. Then they went for a drink.
So they had a break, and they went to this Dewdrop Inn, which is a place where all the pimps, the prostitutes, the low-down life, and the good time, all the good time folks were there. And Richard loves the spotlight on him. He went over to the piano, and he suddenly went,
Wah bam loom bam 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 to the boot, oh rude, to the boot, oh rude, to the boot, oh rude, to the boot.
and the producer said, "That's what I want from you." And they only had 15 minutes left. Rest is history.
Bam loom bam bam bam, I got a girl named Sue.
Oh, they changed many of the lyrics in his songs, you know, because rhythm and blues lyrics were very suggestive, and Richard just kept on singing those when he started singing with a little more of a rock feel.
You can't think of them as being nonsensical. Silly sometimes, but silly for a reason, and the reason was this exhilaration, this great feeling of stuff happening. And so you shout, you scream, you babble things that are, you know, it's almost like speaking in tongues.
She knows how to love me, yes.
Once they tell your voice is black, it didn't matter what you were singing. They didn't want to play it.
Even cleaned up, Richard's Tutti Frutti was still too much for a lot of radio stations to take, so if you couldn't play the original, what could you do? Bring on the White Boys.
When I sang his songs, that was not my tradition, and I wanted to capture as much of his feel as I could because I wanted to be faithful to the music.
Pat Boone covered the record, and he came out polished, white boy, offbeat, no time, and made millions off of it just with the white buck shoes.
People say, well, your record of Tutti Frutti wasn't as exciting as Little Richard's. No, it wasn't, because if I'd sounded like Little Richard, my record wouldn't have gotten played either. But gradually, or rather quickly, the kids and the DJ said, let's play the original records. And the era then of the cover record was over.
They would buy Pat Boone's and put it up on the table and put mine under the table. We were in the same house, but different locations.
He sang in a completely different way. I used to love Elvis, and then Little Richard came buy his records and listen to that, and there'd be this raucous screaming, "Jenny, Jenny, Jenny, won't you come along with..." Fantastic. It just touches nerves all over the place.
Jenny, 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 won't you come along with me? Jenny, Jenny.
Like Elvis, Little Richard had a huge impact in the UK, especially in Liverpool.
Paul McCartney was asked, are you still imitating Little Richard? He said, who isn't?
And he always says, Paul, I told you everything you knew, child. And it's true, he did.
How did you
he
do
was
it?
standing in the wing of the stage, and I was saying, woo! He said, woo!
Between 1955 and 1957, Little Richard could do no wrong. Every single was a classic. And the concerts, well, the concerts were something else again.
You ever seen his show? Jesus. I mean, Little Richard would play that piano with his hands and everything. He'd be on top of the piano, turning flips, doing everything, jumping off with capes and things.
We were in Chicago in '57. I was introduced as Little Richard's fiancée by Richard. I mean, the kids just had to have a piece of me. My dress was all over Chicago. And I thank God Richard was wearing capes in those days, because that's the only way I could. Richard was gorgeous. The girl can't help it. You see that movie? You see my Richard.
He is that explosive, that outgoing, and his ambition is that you pay attention to no one but him. That when he's performing, he's the center of the world.
There you go, baby. Here am I. Will you left me?
He was really influential in a lot of subtle ways. He wasn't overtly sexy like Elvis.
There was this instant appeal, I think, to a lot of guys because he looked like he could be literally the guy next door. Immediately, that must give everybody who wears glasses or has pimples a chance.
Yeah, it helps if you're really good looking, and that also helps with the girls, but with Buddy, the girls even love him too, with his glasses on, so. And I know that because I had to shoo them away a lot.
But importantly, he was one of the first rock and rollers to write his own songs.
Every single was a smash. Peggy Sue was classic. I mean, it didn't matter what he looked like.
Nowhere was safe from rock and roll, and there weren't many places more nowhere than Lubbock, a dry, dusty city on the Texas plains. That was where Charles Buddy Holly came from, ending up a geeky-looking teenager with bad teeth in his own country band. Heaven alone knows what they did when the music stopped.
Well, we were a bunch of guys in West Texas that played all kinds of music that we knew, like mostly country and a bit of swing, and we'd go around and play dances and. You know, when they opened a new garage, they'd have a truck out there we'd play on it. We'd play for the opening of a pack of cigarettes. You know.
His parents were very, very poor. You know, they didn't have enough money.
I mean, when you start playing rock and roll, you make $5 a night instead of 40 cents an hour sacking groceries.
Where do you come from, Lubbock, Texas?
Lubbock, Texas, yes.
You go to school down there?
Well, we did until we got out of high school, finally.
Right after high school, you started playing together?
Yes, sir, that's right.
Buddy could have been a steel worker, he might have driven cattle, except one day Elvis Presley came to town and changed everything.
When Elvis came through town, we said, man, what a way to attract girls.
I first saw Elvis, he had played the Fair Park Coliseum, which was the big venue in Lubbock, Texas.
The next day after Elvis left town, well, we started playing all of Elvis songs. We became Elvis clones, you know.
Well, it's the one for the money, two for the show, three to get ready now, go get go.
He had something that he didn't probably realize at the time, I think. He was him.
He always said to me, you know, a lot of people try to get me not to wear glasses on stage. I want them to love the music. And if they love my music, I come second.
If you looked from his shoulders up, you'd think, surely this is Buddy Holly's accountant. From the shoulders down, guitar low, Strat, rock and roll.
He was groundbreaking. He was making things different.
He felt rock and roll had a short lifespan if it didn't move forward.
They had kind of a looseness. They'd try anything.
It was really fun to do something different, and we didn't have access to tom-toms and bongos and congas.
Well, I'm gonna tell you how it's gonna be.
They were much more interested in their own sound and spent days in the studio getting it right.
Well, all right, so I'm being foolish. Well, all right, let
Little Richard's a big favorite of ours. He'd go around backstage and say, well, all right, and all right, and all right. Let's get this on with all right. That's where that song came from. Doing that on every day, because we were just sitting around working on that, and, you know, Buddy was sort of teaching us the songs. He had just written it.
So the songs flooded out of him in no time. And they were great songs too. Everything was grist to Buddy's mill.
There's nothing that was out of bounds. You know, it's so dangerous to say somebody's the first about anything, but from their own point of view, they weren't copying anybody else. They didn't know what anybody else was doing. This was just them in this situation.
We had so many songs, and I think actually everybody started to believe their parents like this is not going to last. We said, well, this stuff is selling, we better get all we can out of it, because they're going to quit doing this next month, you know?
Quick. 6 classics in a year isn't bad. Also on board, manager and producer Norman Petty. He helped them in the studio, but he kept a firm grip on the cash as well.
One of the things that I saw, they never signed contracts. They always put their hand in the Bible.
Another rock and roll first, the first wife to have doubts about the management. Petty still had his hands on the purse strings, and he did a fair amount of jerking the band strings as well. But Buddy wanted control too.
I mean, he treated us like kids, which we were, but all of a sudden, we didn't have to be treated like kids. We wanted to get our own money, and so Buddy just told Alan Freed, whoever was doing the tour, said, hey, give us the money this time. And so they paid us in cash, and went back to the room, and Buddy said, okay, here's how we split it up. We throw it on the bed, and everybody gets as much as they can, sticks it in their pockets, or wherever they stick it. When it's all gone, that's our split.
Well, I love you, gal, yeah. We had a very tough time trying to get our money. To be honest about it, I realized that Norman Petty was taking advantage of the kids.
Buddy and the boys planned to move to New York, but at the last minute, Norman Petty persuaded the Crickets to stay in Lubbock.
Norman convinced them not to come to New York, saying they're going to eat you alive, those New Yorkers.
The last time we talked to Buddy, actually, in person, we were sitting out in front of Norman Petty's studio, and they said, man, you know, I don't know, it may not work in New York. And if it doesn't work out, well, I'll get back together.
New York, new wife, no money, no mates. Buddy had to do what a boy had to do and headed out on a winter dance party.
At that time, I was pregnant. I had my suitcases out the door when they were leaving. And he said, no, you have to take care of that baby, and it will be just only 2 weeks, you know. I'll be back before you know it.
There wasn't to be a happy ending. When the plane he hired crashed in snowy conditions, Buddy was killed. He was just 22.
A long, long time ago, I can still remember how that music used to make me smile.
Didn't believe it. I said, nah, that's impossible. You know, we were trying to call him last night, you know, and he was going to call us back. So, you know, we're waiting for the phone call.
Be happy for a while.
It even was more sad when Buddy was killed that we hadn't been hanging out, and you look back and say, why did we, you know, this was such a fun deal and such a dream come true, and then we just all, you know, got nuts.
One more step. I can't.
One of his dreams that he always kept saying is, you know, I'm doing my music, and I want my music to be remembered. His dream has come true.
Inside the day, the music died.
My love, all of my kissing, you don't know it's what's been a missing, no boy. When you're with me, no boy, I thought the world could see that you were a bit for me.
By the end of the 50s, it looked like your parents might have been right all along. Buddy was dead, Elvis was in the army, Chuck Berry was in jail, Jerry Lee was in disgrace, Little Richard had found God again, and Bill Haley was still your dad. But once the tiger got out of the cage, it was pretty difficult to get it back in again. And in the caverns of Liverpool, something stirred.